Ooh.
And then we'll wait for a few participants. Participants are coming in now. So
Hi, participants.
hello, hello. 9/11. And then we'll go live on Facebook.
Ooh.
One moment.
We have so many friends.
Oh, I know, so many nice people coming in.
Yeah.
So we're gonna go ahead and go live on Facebook.
I see my uncle, Xavier, Shawnee Bear,
That's amazing.
Rocha. I wish we were all in the same room together. This would be such an amazing group of people in like one space.
Okay. All right. Well, it looks like we've got like 23. I know I kind of want to just be like, hey, we're just going to let you all in. But we're going to try it during the Q&A at the end. We figured it might be less distracting to have 36 people on screen. But we're going to try this out. We're on Zoom. We're also live on Facebook. So for the people who are participating by Zoom, I'm going to have a chance to maybe bring you in. Some people are chatting too. So hi, Francis. Lots of hi, Francis. Thank you guys for coming. My name's Dennis Nance. I'm the curator at Galveston Arts Center. Thank you all for being here in this virtual space. Even though I'm sad we can't gather to do this in person, I think it's really awesome that looking at the list of people who've signed up and that are tuning in, they're from across the state and beyond. So it's nice to actually have this virtual space because we can be reaching people that might not be able to make the drive down to Galveston. But that said, if you are able to come to Galveston, Francis Almendárez' exhibition, Rhythm and Pleasure, is currently on view. We're open Wednesday through Sunday, 12 to 5, and we'll be on view through November 15th. Time to see it if you want to conversation with a visit on your own. So please come. We'd love to see you or have you in our space, maybe not see you too close. But yeah. So thank you, like Francis, Almendárez and Leslie for being here and for being up for having this conversation. It's really nice to connect people. I was telling Leslie that that's my favorite part of my job, being audience, individuals with each other to just like see what happens, what sparks of conversation happen. Also want to give thanks to the individuals who make these programs possible and make them free of charge, to our member donors. We appreciate your support. Now it means much to us. This program was also made possible by the National Endowment for the Arts. And and Texas Commission on the Arts. So their support has really helped us out and enrich our program. And specifically for Francis's exhibition, I'd like to give a shout out to Maceo Spice and Import, creating pallets for the installation, as well as the many individuals that donated Mona's clothing. So there's definitely a piece of all of you in Francis's show. So technical things, I did mention you're all on mute. You can just see us. I'm mute myself whenever they begin speaking. But towards the end, if you do have questions and you're on Zoom, use the Q&A to throw your question or the chat. For Facebook, I'm also going to be monitoring those comments in the background. When we get to like a natural segue to Q&A, I might chime in with the Facebook ones and the Zoom, try to bring you in live. So I think that's all the housekeeping. To give you a brief introduction to our speakers, please visit our website or the event to learn about, read their full bios. They have many accomplishments. Introduce you to Francis Almendárez, who's an interdisciplinary artist, maker, and educator based in Houston, originally born in LA. His exhibition, Rhythm and Pleasure, that's currently on view, was first shown at art, it was previously shown at Art Pace in San Antonio. And it was really awesome to see that show when I was passing through San Antonio and think about how wonderful that would be to have in Galveston, considering the historical significance of Galveston as an important entry point into the United States for so many individuals, but as well as currently and throughout its history as an important port of the exchange of goods. So Francis is joined by Leslie Moody Castro, who I hope you all know. We got to actually have her in Galveston when she was making an epic road trip of Texas in 2017 as part of the Texas Biennial. And she followed a residency at the Galveston Artist Residency. She was the first curator in residence where she did a project. So she has some nice insights, spent some time in Galveston, knows the island. She's joining us from Mexico City. Woohoo, virtual space makes this possible. And if you don't know, Leslie runs an amazing business in Mexico City where she shares her extensive knowledge and experience of the local art community and amazing experiences for visitors. So I'm gonna bow out and pass the mic. I might, again, just call me back in, I can join in, but
Dennis,
thank you both for being here.
don't go too far.
I'm gonna be just late. All right, thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Well, just to kind of get started, Francis, I think this virtual space is such a cool space. You know, you and I chatted for the first time like 2 or 3 weeks ago to talk about the work. But what's really, really interesting about this virtual space is that I've actually not seen the work. I've watched the video, but I haven't seen it in its like full installation. Maybe, hopefully one day that can happen and I can exist in this space as well. So it's a really interesting sort of platform to kind of be able to be close to the work, have a conversation about the work. But in terms of like the dimensionality of the elements, I was wondering if you could actually give us a little bit of orientation on what's in this space.
Yeah, so when you enter the space, depending on which direction you enter from, you'll see at the very center of the gallery space.
It's upstairs, right?
Yeah, it's upstairs. It's upstairs. But when you enter at the center of the gallery, you'll see a group of palettes kind of just piled together, creating this platform. And on top of it, there's a pile of clothes that we were able to collect from many people in Houston, but also in Galveston. And oh yeah, there you go. There's the picture.
There it is.
Yeah, and so at the far end, at the corner, you can see that's where the monitors are. And on the walls, you'll see the 2 projections. Mm-hmm. And so this is the second time or the second iteration of it. And it's changed from the first time, but still the same idea, the same amount of screens to look at. And still the palettes and the pile of clothes at the center to kind of like welcome the viewer. Hopefully they can trust me enough to come and, you know, sit on it, maybe recline. But it's there for several reasons too. And we can get into that a little bit later. But there's eight channels in total, 2 projections, and 6 TV monitors. And the TV monitors is like this recurring object that I continue to use and play around with for many different reasons. But that's kind of what's in the space. Yeah.
Why do you play around with the TV monitors?
The TV monitors, for me, just because I grew up not only like watching TV, but I grew up in LA, which is like Hollywood, the TV capital of the world, right? And so, and so I just, you know, like it was so embedded in you know, everything. And I was very, like, as I grew up, you know, we grew up watching certain TV, cartoons, TV shows, films. And so it became the way that we interpreted the world around us, right? And a lot of times, well, oftentimes, if not most times, you know, the image of Latinos, Latinx, and other cultures and other peoples are always misrepresented, right? And so that I began to question that and thinking about what's the best way to kind of begin battling that and using the same sort of visual vocabulary or visual language that I grew up watching and immersed in. And so that's my interest in the moving image, in particular in video film, but also in using TV monitors, because that's, you know, what we grew up staring at.
Yeah, well, it's what we're staring at now in a different format.
In a different format, yeah.
I think that this idea of the TV monitor and about communication in general really hit home for me the first time I went to Latin America, and which was when I did a study abroad in El Salvador when I was a senior in college. And it hit home, this idea of like the TV monitor being the source of translating culture and communication, because what I was seeing in El Salvador were like US cartoons and television programs, but like The Simpsons, but then translated, and not only translated into Spanish, but translated culturally. And so even like the sort of history or the things that were happening in pop culture were being translated from the United States to what was happening in pop culture and politics in El Salvador, which was an election year. And it became this like source not only of shifting culture, defining culture, communicating culture, but of propagandizing culture as well. It was a really like defining moment for me to understand like the relationship between Latin America and the US and consumerism and capitalism as well, which I think but it's definitely something that's playing into your work, the production of like a cultural archive, and the body is really important. But to start off, you also said that the installation shifted from what it was originally in San Antonio a little bit into what it is now in Galveston. And I know some of those elements came in with like some of the local businesses and people in the area. So like Maceo's provided the pallets, and some, I think, individuals provided the used clothing, which will then get donated. But can you talk a little bit about like the systems of sort of mass production in the clothing, and then like the life cycles of this sort of mass production?
Yeah, absolutely. So those are all things that I'm very interested in particular, like the global circulation of these things, in particular the palette and clothes in general, which are also recurring objects in my work. And these two things in particular, because not only like how they globally circulate, but also like their associations to labor, right? Mm-hmm. And so they have this multi-purpose symbolic meaning or value in this installation. But also like the clothes in particular has like corporeal properties, which I'm also really interested in. And thinking about not just like the labor, but also like the body, and what kinds of bodies are the ones that are performing these types of labors, right? But in terms of
and where they come from, especially on the island of Galveston. Sorry to interrupt.
No,
Galveston has a tendency to be such a transient place. Like in the summer, the population doubles in size, and people have passed through it historically. You know, it's a place where there's a constant movement of people that has defined the island in ways that I don't think most people know about, quite honestly. So it's interesting to see the sort of pile of clothing that does reflect the sort of corporal movement of the island as well.
Yeah, and the other, I guess, part of it is thinking about that global circulation. And for me, my interest in that is also how it mirrors the circulation of people and communities and how they migrate, you know, to offer up their bodies and their labor. Mm-hmm. So that's another form of circulation that's happening. And so these are sort of stand-ins mirroring that circulation or that migration, right? Mm-hmm. And at the same time, on another level there, it's also by extension the circulation of culture or cultures.
How it gets mixed and like muddy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I found it interesting that these palettes came from a spice company, you know, considering like the spice routes were some of the first routes that going from the east into the west, right? And also Galveston, like being a port city, So it's a site of exchange in it and of itself, and many immigrants coming into Texas and the US through there.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of layers. And
it's been like point of contact for so many cultures for so long. I mean, the history of like German and Polish families in Texas comes directly from the history of families passing through Galveston. And I think what you've also done in the video is you played with blurring the definitions of what labor is. One of the things that you and I talked about that I really enjoyed watching was how a lot of the sort of the visual definitions of labor that you were using would be things considered to be in domestic spaces, really, like cooking, the shot of the women sweeping was just such a lovely poetic shot. And yeah, and how you're really blurring these definitions of what labor is and then leading into the shot of the dancing, which I definitely want to get to. But if you could actually talk about your relationship with like this domestic labor and what is considered feminine labor a little bit, because I know that's really important to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's because having grown up in a single mother, like I was raised by a single mother, and so that, yeah, by a single mother who was raised by a single mother who was raised by a single mother. So it's this, lineage of single mothers, and so they are our heroes, sheroes. And so they are the people that I look up to, and so I want to reflect that in the work that I do, because they are my not only they're the people that I look up to, essentially. They're the people that have raised me, and so I just want to reflect that. But also, like, a lot of the things that I've learned, it's through them. So
Mm-hmm.
I owe my education to them. And fortunately, I was able to learn a lot, not everything, but a lot through them, and in including cooking and cleaning, basic things that today it's hard to find in youth.
Uh-huh.
I know in Latino culture we can attest to that, right?
Yeah.
But
Well,
also in terms, go ahead.
I was gonna say one of the other things that happens in like is the passing on of like oral histories, right? Like I don't have recipes that my grandmother had. Like you just cook. You know what I mean? Like I think that's another like cultural system that we have is how histories are passed down from person to person, and how like basically learning to cope and thrive in life is you learn these things from your matriarchs in many ways, and that is also a system of labor that isn't necessarily considered one in like the bigger definition of what labor really is as value, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and learning through doing.
Yeah.
Versus like other methods of learning, right? So
Right.
without even like thinking about it so much or theorizing about it, we're occupying other parts of our brain in order to learn, right? And so yeah, definitely interested in that passage or that passing down of knowledge and experience and wisdom, that in a non-traditional way that we don't really think about so much, and that we don't necessarily value, and that I think we should value, because there's so much wealth in that. There's so much wealth in those dichos, right? Like they're silly, some of them are funny, some of them are insulting, but they're loaded with so much wisdom, right? And other forms as well, like cooking, growing your own food, right? It's so important. Growing your own food. Like, where does that exist in the US or in the West? Like, obviously there's still communities now doing it, but like it's almost been completely erased.
Yeah.
And that's problematic, right?
I think too that the shots of cooking in the video itself reminded me of a conversation that I had with a dear friend in Austin, Shalini Ramanathan, that goes back to this idea of what labor and value is. Her family is from India, and she talks about her mom cooking, and her mom has cooked for me many times, and just this laborious process of like cooking traditional Indian food that that doesn't have the same monetary value, for example, because the labor of what she does isn't recognized in the same way, if that makes any sense. And the video really brought that home to me as well, is this idea of like, what labor holds value and what labor doesn't, and what is the definition of value when it's like in these very fluid terms. And to see that sort of in this space, and think about like the palettes, in terms of the palettes, like moving objects of capitalism, and the clothing and the body all kind of existing together in this one room of labor, value, consumption, the body, archive. Like there's just so much happening in there that's really interesting to me, that also talks about your experience as an artist, your experience growing up in this, and then to the pilgrimage that you did to go and shoot this video.
Yeah. At the same time, like while I'm aiming to elevate and value their labor, at the same time, I've learned to look at my own labor and value it as well, because as artists, we tend not to do so. And then I'm fortunate enough to be able to bring in my family into the projects, and so like they're my team, you know, they're my people, and we get to work together. We're also learning from each other at the same time, so there's multiple processes happening simultaneously. And a lot of like back and forth in terms of like what I'm learning. I'm also, what I'm learning from other communities, I'm also learning from myself. So it's really interesting how that's working out.
Can you talk a little bit about the process of shooting the video? Like your like emotional, mental process of like thinking through it, being in Latin America, because it was filmed in a few different places, or shot in a few different places. Can you give us some insight on that?
Yeah, so the first time that I went was in 2014.
And it was El Salvador, right?
And it was Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Honduras, because I have family everywhere through that process of migration, right? And so I didn't go with the intention of like shooting anything. I went to visit my grandmother, and I had recently lost my job, so I was like, okay, I'm just gonna go. And I've been promising her that I'm gonna go visit, so I took advantage and I left for a couple months.
Yeah.
And so I got to meet a lot of family for the first time, and we did this journey with her, you know, traveling through her path of migration and different locations where she lived and worked and where we have family still. And so the people that are in the videos, those are primarily family members, but also like friends of the family or neighbors. So people of the communities. And it took a while. I spent a lot of time there just like getting to know them at first. And then until I felt comfortable and they felt comfortable with me like pulling up a camera, then that's when we began like doing shoots. But and actually I didn't even start shooting people. I was just shooting like insects and plants and animals, just and they became interested, you know, like this fancy object, and it was just a point and shoot, but to them it was, you know, like this fancy object. And so the conversation began like, oh, what is this, what are you doing, what is this for? And then, you know, the conversations over time evolved, and we became more comfortable with each other. They became more comfortable with the camera. And then I shot some stuff, but I had no idea what I was going to use it for. And so I came back with the footage. Then, you know, a year later, I started going through it, and I realized, oh, what I shot was a lot of like labor. And it wasn't until I put it into a sequence that I realized like what it was that I shot. So then I was like, oh, okay, so this is what I can do with this. So I made like a small video, and I realized I don't have enough footage. I need to go back. Also, the quality is really bad. So I need to invest in a camera. So yeah, it took a couple years applying to grants and stuff, and to finally Art Pace like let me in. and they spoil you. And so I got a budget to go back with my team, and this time with intention, like I went and went and shot my different family members, and I had I had a better idea of what kinds of shots I was looking for. And also I had my brother along with me, so he was totally in charge of sound. and so yeah, and then we came back with this footage, and then I decided, like, okay, I want to make some sort of film. Mm-hmm. And I don't know exactly how I'm going to present it, but let's just go with it. And luckily, like, Art Pace is just so super supportive, and you have so many resources, and I had the time, right? So I was able to come up with this exhibition. And by the end of the time, that my time in Central America, like, everybody wanted to be a part of the work, even though they didn't necessarily know what it was going to be for. Yeah. They just knew it was coming to the US. And I didn't know either. So it's not like I could have, told them this is going to be a film released at a film festival. No, because I had no idea. But I told them that I was going to use them. And thanks to ArtPace, I was able to pay everybody that participated. Okay. So thank you, ArtPace.
Hey, ArtPace, magical world of ArtPace.
So the next step is to take the work back to Central America. And I recently got a grant from Yes Contemporary to take it to El Salvador. And I'm going to do a workshop because a lot of the youth express interest in learning how to use a camera and audio recording devices. Yeah. So we're going to do a workshop with my brother and hopefully help them produce the work that they want to do, and then have a big screening. And if that goes well, at some point I would like to, like, replicate it and take it to Honduras and Nicaragua and wherever else. I don't know. We'll see.
Speaking of cycles, like, that, to see the video have another life, or like a second life in where it was produced, is really quite remarkable. Like, that doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, and it's kind of happening organically, like, and a lot of studio visits, obviously, with people who ask very difficult and necessary questions. So yeah, I don't want it to be just about extracting, like, I don't want that. I don't want it to feel or be a documentary, like, because it's not a documentary. Right.
Which is always, like, the tricky space of these things, right? It's like, we're pulling information. How are we also giving information? What's the balance there? Yeah, that's amazing that it's going to be able to have a second life. That also this story takes me to the section of the dancers. And just thinking about, like, space and cycles and it having another life, is one of the things I was really interested in, was the slippage between the public and the private space that was happening in that scene the dancer. That's a really, really important part of the video, I think. Thanks, Dennis.
Yeah, the sort of camaraderie that exists, or that the space sort of allows to happen. And it's, this is totally informal. Like, it's literally the sidewalk and that's in front of a restaurant. So
that's what's really powerful about it too. It's sort of this reclaiming of the space and reclaiming of its use that I think is really powerful.
Yeah. A commercial space, because it's a club, but they're not inside. There's more people interested in the outside, what's happening outside, than in the inside. But they're happy that they're getting business, selling alcohol and food. So it works out. It's a mutual relationship.
Right. And you were telling me that this was this happens often.
Yeah, and I want to say every weekend or every other weekend, but in speaking of reclamation of space, like, I also found it really interesting that, this scene is in San Pedro Sula, which is, like, at one point it was like the murder capital of the world, because it's on the path of the drug cartels to the US, right? And so in this particular corner, there have been murders, and for people to just, be able to still, like, occupy space in this way.
Yeah.
Not to say that they're not fearful of their lives, but I think it's important to like recognize that what kind of space they're in.
Right.
That it's it can be a very violent space.
Wow.
But thanks to communities like this, they help to kind of destroy that image, and I want to help them in destroying this image of San Pedro Sula being a violent city full of gangsters and drug lords and all that.
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate that that's always a narrative that like gets out, but there are people that live here, right? Like this is someone's home where they have children, they live their lives, they go to work, they participate culturally, and to be able to assert the power to reclaim one's space like this, I think is hugely important, and it should be recognized. And it's admirable because, I mean, what positions of privilege do we live in that this is not, like standing on a corner dancing is not something we have to worry about, right? Like, yeah, it's really remarkable. And it's really remarkable to see that they're outside, because there is obviously like sound bleed that happens, and it's not contained in one space, and it's like really reclaiming the street.
Yeah, and this is totally led by the musicians, the Garifuna musicians. That's totally their like community, and then they welcome others into this event. And that happens like, and they rotate locations as well. So this is totally led by that community, which I think is really important to know, because they're undervalued, obviously. Yeah.
Wow. Can you tell us a little bit about the dance that's happening here? Like the music.
Yeah. So what I find really interesting about the dance is that unlike other dances where typically the male takes on the role of taking the lead, right? In this particular dance, the female is the lead, and not only the lead, but also a sort of conductor, because depending on how fast they move, that's how fast the drummers have to play. So they are responding to the dancer. The drummers are responding to the dancers. So yeah, that role of like that reversal of roles is very interesting. And the men have to ask women in order to dance with them. They have to have permission. Like they can't just jump in there. And sometimes they do, but they get kicked out. Like, pushed out of the circle because they have to acquire permission. Which so that it's a really interesting reversal of roles. And I find it also very admirable
and
empowering, absolutely, especially because they embrace their bodies, their sexuality, and it's not like it's not your standardized body type, right? Or skin tone, right?
The Western idealized, right?
So they're for me, like that's a radical empowerment of it's just a radical example of the empowering of women. And Thurs, that's a really good example for all the other women. You can tell that they have like a mutual respect for them, because the other the more like the brown people, the lighter skin, like that are more indigenous, or not more indigenous, because they are also indigenous. But the lighter skin Hondurans, they also participate, but they know that it's a space that they need to respect. They can't just jump in there like a club or any other kind of dance arena. Like they know that there are rules, or and that they have to respect not only the space, but also the people, in particular the musicians, and they all have to like not pay, but they donate. And so if you see that box there, that people donate there in order to dance, or just to listen to the music, just to partake in the event. So it's really like community funded.
And then this is also something that is community driven. This isn't something that is like perpetuated by the big powers that be in order to maintain a cultural history. This is self-driven within a community.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which I think is remarkable too. And so that, and in terms of like labor and cultural production, like the value of how things are valued, right? Like what are these like blurry and fuzzy definitions of labor? Like how are histories perpetuated? And I think that's another thing that the video is doing really, really well, is like really analyzing that and analyzing systems of labor and value.
Yeah, and the transmission of culture and knowledge, because and that's the beauty of that, and what drew me to the scene and what was happening is that there's multiple things happening, multiple forms of labor that are happening. First of all, like performing music or dancing, they're not even considered labor, it's considered entertainment. So that, I mean, that I want to completely like erase that. I don't want to use that frame of looking at these forms of culture and work, because it sure may be entertaining, but it's work. That's really what it is. And then at the same time, like they are transmitting or passing down these traditions, the traditions of dance, the traditions of music, of language also, and history, right? Their own cultural history. And all of that is passed through the songs and through the music and through the dance. So all of these are operating simultaneously.
Mm-hmm. There's so much. Do you ever have people tell you, so when I tell friends that aren't in the field of art, when I say, oh, I just have a lot of work right now, like I'm a little overwhelmed or tired, then their response usually is like, well, at least you love what you do, like as an implication that it's not a labor that is the same as like going to an office or the kind of like work, if that makes any sense. Does that ever happen to you? Because it's kind of the same, it's the same thing of like, of something being less valued, even though it's like loaded culturally and is a perpetuation of histories, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Which is
the other thing I forgot, it's like they're also teaching, because there's younger boys and girls that are also there, like learning how to play the instruments, because it's not the same people playing the entire time, they're rotating.
Oh wow, they just like hop out.
They just jump tag in and tag out, and so you'll have a young boy playing next to an elder, and it's really fascinating. So that's another part of it. It's like they're teaching their youth as well, and they're teaching the community, especially people that are outside of that are not part of Garifuna community. Like they're learning about that their culture as well. Yeah.
Which we all know, teaching is not leisure by any means.
Not at all. Yeah, teaching is one of the hardest jobs.
Like, right? You are an educator. My mom, it's become so with like such a major shift in how education has happen lately. It is not an easy job, and it is not lead by any means.
Yeah.
But Francis, that also takes me to the title. You there?
Yeah, I can hear you now. It was breaking up a bit.
Frozen? Oh. Sorry. I'm in Mexico City, so my internet connection can be a little unstable. But I kind of want to round that out with the title, because that ties exactly into what you're saying about these systems of labor, pleasure, leisure, rhythm and pleasure. And you play with that title a little bit to just talk about it. Can you tell us about just tell us about that, and because that's also a system of communication that I think is a medium for the practice.
Yeah, definitely. Pleasure is written in that form because it's both happening, right? And I think what the people that are in the videos show us is that they are able to exist and operate and survive with dignity, with pride, outside of a Western like sort of structure or system. Like the person making the counterfeit Nike shoes. Like he's totally like in his own, outside of like the structure of Nike Corporation, like just making these shoes. Like, and so a lot of these people, if not most, they're doing these various tasks of labor for themselves, for their families, for their communities. And so the way that they hold themselves up is with dignity, is with pride, and also like very aware that what they do is really important, not only to the community, but also like to pass on and continue passing on, because a lot of that is being lost, right? More and more people are leaving these countries to go elsewhere. And so now more than ever, it's important to continue passing those things on. But going back to the title, yeah, definitely, and everything everything that's happening in the videos, there is movement, there is rhythm happening, from grinding corn to make tortillas to literally dancing. And so I wanted to again reframe how and rhythm could be seen or viewed or experienced or heard. And that's why it was really important for me also to like make sure that the audio recordings were much better quality, so you can hear the grinding, and you can hear the drum, and you can hear the making of the tortillas, and how the rhythm of that is very similar to the beating of the drum, and little things like that.
Those nuances, Francis, are so important in this video. I rewatched it again this morning, and the silence that exists between the sounds of like the grinding of the corn, or like the machete, or the tortillas, like it's just a silence that exists in order to magnify and amplify the sound of the work being done. And I think that those are really, really, really important. And it just really adds to the experience of seeing the video.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking of it in terms of when I was editing, I was thinking of it in terms of a composition, like a musical score. There's no dialogue in there. There's no dialogue in there, and that was intentional, because although there may not be a narrative, that I feel like there's still narrative, but I kind of like that ambiguity. And I like at the ends we have almost like a chorus, the street vendor selling the various things that they sell, right? And so I thought of it in that sort of structure of, because I also come from a music background, like my brother. So yeah, thinking of rhythm in the many ways that it manifests itself.
Yeah.
And then pleasure or leisure as well, like blurring that or trying to converge it.
Yeah.
And just showing how they take pride in everything that they do. And it's also like, sometimes they don't even consider it work. Like they truly, honestly, genuinely enjoy what they do. And it's because they're not in this system of like profit making and overproducing. It's like they're doing it for themselves and their communities, versus like, overproducing to make profits. Like it's a totally different like way of producing and existing.
When it definitely subverts the values of Western culture, like what is it that we value? And I think that's really important too. And the idea of a composition, I love that you say that, because it does feel like it was a composed piece. And it also brings to life like the life that exists on a Latin America street. It's noisy. That's where life happens. That's where, like that's where communication happens. And I think that experience is so different from most US cities, where the sounds of the street is just how you know what's happening around you in Latin America. And it's a really important part of the story of these places, I think. Yeah. How about we bring Dennis back in?
Sure.
Is he here? There he is.
Hi. I've been listening. You just didn't make me like nodding. Thank you guys. This is great. There was a comment and a question, and I had one too, but on Facebook. Brenda Bunton Shaloser, sorry for mispronouncing your name, says, love your view on family and the role family has played in your life. There's so much there's so much of our soul that spills into our work. Nice comments. Thank you, Brenda. And then
thank you, Brenda.
We do have Carolyn Jansen had left a question in the Q&A. Let's try this. If you want to join us, Carolyn, I'm going to let you answer live. So like, get ready. We'll try it. Caroline might be able to join us. I will allow to talk. So Caroline, if you can hear us, go ahead and pose your question. You'd pose the question up around the time you were talking about the work produced and shown here, going back to El Salvador, I think.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Well, I really very much enjoyed your presentation. I was wondering when you were saying to...
Oh. We lost you.
Technology.
Oh.
Wait.
Okay.
Here you are. You're there.
Okay, I'm there.
I normally hear you. Yeah, that's fine.
So I was wondering if when people move to the United States, if these cultures are so strong, they must be maintained, and how would they be maintained in this different context? So could you even replicate it here in the States? And it might be that they're in different locations like dance halls, that some of these cultures can be found back.
That is such a good question. And I honestly think that, I mean, Francis, I don't know what you think about this, but I think it depends on the place that people are moved to and the social context around them. Yeah, I think that moving definitely implies flexibility of culture as cultures are kind of merged together. Yeah, and so I think that maintaining does happen, but I think it shifts form. What do you think, Francis?
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely happening and has happened and will continue to happen. And the only thing I want to add to that is that it also like begins to overlap with other cultures as you know, they begin to cultures. What happens in the U.S. like cultures begin to meet with each other and so they influence each other. And now we have, for example, in LA, I remember now there's Korean food, like Korean and Mexican food. So the converging of cultures does happen, and I guess new hybrid cultures. I don't know what terms to use, but yeah, it's definitely happening.
And to add to that, here in Mexico City, a friend of mine owns a series of restaurants, and he opened a restaurant called Chinaloa, which is Chinese food from a group of Chinese immigrants that came to Mexico in the early 1900s and settled in Sinaloa and kind of created their own mix of like Chinese, Mexican, Sinaloa food. Like it happens all over. It's like, it's a really fluid thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And also like it's happening and has happened in Central America itself. There's so many cultures that have converged there, from West Africa, the indigenous cultures, but also European, and then like waves of immigration from all over the world, from Asia, from the Middle East. So it's happening there anyways. Yeah. It's happening everywhere, I would say.
Yeah. Who's next, Dennis?
Me, because there's the options. Come on, someone type something or raise your hand in the participants. I can bring you in, and I think I figured out the video. But I like that conversation around collision of cultures, and I don't know. I actually took a course in college called Collision of Cultures, and it was like that moment from the colonization of Latin America, how has sort of trajected, like created a whole new trajectory of like cultural evolution, or just adaptations of indigenous cultures, Western cultures. So seeing thinking about that always happening is amazing. It was more on the rhythm side, because one thing I found present in the video, and so you all know too, in the chat on Zoom, we'll add it later to Facebook, there's a composite video of the different ones you'll see in the gallery if you want to get a sense of the rhythm I'm talking about. But I was reading a lot about flow, and kind of like, I make my shirts and things, and there's a zone that you get into with particularly like manual labor, like digging in my garden this weekend, that you just, it's like pleasure to that. And for me, that was like a very direct reference that I found with the work of seeing someone sweep the floor, just like hit that zone of like pleasure that is present in labor. And I think that that was like a really beautiful part of the work. So comment if you want to elaborate on that. If you've thought about that some in your work, would be great to hear about.
I think that was one of my favorite scenes, honestly, that pause, like that very composed sort of stillness, because in the other scenes there's so much movement happening, but in the scene where she is sweeping the floor and really gets into that rhythm and you hear the sound of that rhythm, things just sort of slow down before they pick up again. That was, yeah, I really agree with you, Dennis. Like you feel the rhythm and you understand the rhythm of just like the mundane act, the banal act of doing something domestic, like gardening or sweeping or cooking. You know, it's just, it implies that rhythm that's really natural. I think Joan Finn raised her.
Joan, board member Joan, I'm going to allow you to talk, and I'm going to try to make it do video and not do what I did earlier, but come on.
And then my mom had a question, which we'll get to in June.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, it's nice to see you all.
Good to see
you.
I'm a school teacher, a high school teacher with a very large and growing Hispanic and Latino population. And oftentimes they feel a little isolated. But I think that it's really beautiful, the conversation that you're having today. And I think that they would benefit, they would so appreciate it, because it's not a conversation that they hear, right?
Yeah.
So maybe I can invite you back to my classroom when I have an audience, because we don't go face to face until next week.
Oh, wow. Joan, where are you at?
I'm sorry?
Where are you?
I am
What city?
I live in Galveston, but I teach just off the island in Lamarck,
Okay.
at a smaller high school.
Mm-hmm.
But
we'll make this
Yeah,
recording. Sorry.
Maybe we could. So this is a recording, and at the very least, I could play it for them.
Yes, I'll share it with you, Joan.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Is this your work, Leslie, behind you?
No, this is, I'm not an artist. I'm a curator and writer. This is a painting by Cruz Ortiz, who's an artist that lives and works in San Antonio.
It's pretty spectacular.
Yeah.
Be great.
Thanks, guys. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Joan.
Thanks,
Joan.
All right. So Joan figured out. That was awesome. Yeah, thank you guys. This is great. It's a little quiet in there.
Before we go anywhere, I want to ask, so my mom had a question. We have a lot of educators on this call today.
Yeah, great.
Who's a second grade teacher, and she asked a question: is it pleasure or a measure of excellence? And I'm not, I think that's a really good question, because it's also something that's so fluid and dependent on how we define things. And I think that definition can be really individual. What do you think, Francis?
Yeah, I agree. Like how, I guess back to the defining, like how do we define excellence, right? But it could be both. Yeah,
it can totally, I mean, I think that there's room for it to be both too. We live in a really big world. Yeah. What do you think, Dennis?
Pleasure or measurements? I lean towards pleasure. Like, I think that we all need to find pleasure in what we do. So
yeah.
And then I don't know. That's just how I feel at the moment. So
I agree. I think it's yeah, I think we're all struggling in some ways with these definitions, and we're struggling with, yeah, I think, you know, there are challenges that life has presented lately. And so any way that pleasure can exist in what we do is definitely positive.
It's also too, like, I find like measures of excellence are super relative for me too, but I feel like a sense of joy or pleasure, you can, you know, like, whereas it's sort of relative to the circumstance, because like what is excellent from one person is very different. And like, yeah, I think I've had a conversation recently with like the problems with professionalizing things, or sometimes for it to be messy because it's wonderful that way. So
I totally
yeah. Oh wait, someone has just chimed in. Pam said, gardening also puts among other living plants and creatures that pose fascination and pleasure when approached as yourself, approached as yourself as part of the ecosystem. Yeah, centering yourself
become
in
a
nature. Sorry, read that back a little awkward. This is awesome, you guys. Thank you both, and I'm glad. I would really happy to hear you two speak, like seeing the work with fresh eyes, Leslie. Yeah, I loved it. Yeah, I loved seeing how the show came together in Galveston, and I hope that more people can see it, but I'm really glad that we have this bit of time together documented.
And the videos available on the website too.
Yes.
The full video.
I put a link in the chat. I'll add it to Facebook probably later in the comments because technology.
Thank you so much for having us, Dennis, and for connecting me with you, Francis. I really appreciate that. I love having talented, smart people in my life.
It's lovely to meet you too, and I'm glad. Thank you, Dennis, for organizing this and for inviting me to bring this show to Galveston, and for inviting me to have this conversation. And thank you to Galveston Art Center, and thank everyone for like chiming in and being generous with your time to listen to this. Thank you.
Yeah, like that's a nice way to end the day. Just to add a couple more quick thank yous with Francis's show. I'd mentioned Macio's Spice. I also wanted to give a big thanks to Brian Garcia. He's preparator at the Art Center, and I think so often you go into museums and you don't realize that those things in the space, yes, Francis and his brother Anthony were there with us the whole time, but thank you, Brian Garcia, for all of your support in installing exhibitions, as well as Raina Kahlura, our Director of Education, who's keeping it going on that front. If you guys want to know more about our education offerings, there's a virtual ceramics camp happening on Sundays. You can sign up for. Our Director, Lisa Shaw. And so, yeah, so many great people. Bree, our new staff people, Ashanti and Vanessa at the front desk. Please come say hi. We might not all be there at once, but it's nice to be in this space with you now, and I hope you all have a great night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Problem, I don't know how to end this now.
Bye, Dennis. Bye, Francis.
Bye, y'all.
Bye. See you soon.
Okay, we're off Facebook, but we're still here. Bye, everyone. 12, 10, 9. See you later, Francis.
See you later.